All right, today what I want to talk about is what type of footwear I'd recommend, particularly when it comes to strength training or even cross training for that matter. When we're looking at a grinding type movement, like a deadlift, if we're looking at like a goblet squat, and we're going to do something like a kettlebell windmill, or even a dynamic exercise like a swing, we want to look for a shoe that has a really flat sole. So this particular shoe is a weightlifting shoe. It has a very flat sole. This is like the 5 fingers. 5 fingers is a great type of footwear when you're talking about strength training. And then we've got like a running shoe. The problem is with a running shoe when you're doing strength training, this cushioned surface is actually going to inhibit your proprioception. And what that means is you have mechanical receptors in your hands and your feet that are going to communicate with your brain as far as balance, coordination. It's also going to give you information and process information and to where you are in space. So if I've got this real cushioned shoe, then it inhibits or retards that process. There are certain exercises I wouldn't even attempt, especially with a significant amount of weight, if I didn't have a weightlifting shoe. Now I've got some weightlifting shoes here. They're actually really flat, but they're wooden, so they're actually elevated. Now if I'm going to do an exercise, say like a bent press, and I'm going to use a significant amount of weight, I would never attempt this with a running shoe, because when I start coming down with that type of weight and then I'm coming up, I can't have anything that's going to inhibit that mechanical receptors or the proprioception that's giving me that information where I am in space. If I've got a cushioned shoe and I've got a heavy weight over my head, I'm going to lose that balance, I'm going to lose that coordination. So I want to be very rooted or very grounded. So in terms of footwear, we want to, especially when we're talking about strength training, get a really nice flat sole shoe. All right, another thing I want to talk to you today about is mirrors, weightlifting gloves, and then weightlifting belts. Now, a lot of times people ask me, well, how come you don't like mirrors? How come you don't have mirrors? And for me, it's very important to educate people on the fact that we want to develop kinesthetic awareness within our bodies. And mirrors can retard that process. So what we want to do is we want to be able to learn to feel musculature. The human body is designed around muscular integration. We're not designed to isolate muscles. We're designed to integrate many muscles. So it's important that you learn to feel and create this kinesthetic awareness in whatever exercise you're doing. So every once in a while, yeah, it's okay to be able to look in a mirror, but when people rely too heavily on mirrors, then they never truly develop the kinesthetic awareness. The next thing I want to talk about is gloves. Just like with shoes, with a cushioned glove, again, we have mechanical receptors in our hands. So if we're wearing this glove, it's going to retard that process. So we are not able to communicate properly, our brain sending that signal to our nervous system into the mechanical receptors, particularly when we're doing an exercise like, let's say I'm going to press this kettlebell over my head. One of the things I want to do is I want to do what's called crush grip, or I really want to squeeze this kettlebell. That's going to create something called irritation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create greater nerve flow to the primary muscle group that I'm working by squeezing that. If I have gloves, again, I'm not going to get proper information from my brain nervous system into the musculature. So those gloves can really inhibit that proprioception. So again, if I'm squeezing this, now I'm actually able to integrate more musculature, greater nerve flow to increase my strength. It's also going to make things a lot safer. So we want to stay away from gloves. We want flat sole shoes. Stay away from mirrors. And the next thing I want to talk about is weight belts. A lot of times in gyms you'll see guys wearing these weight belts. And what happens is your transversus abdominis is your primary spinal stabilizer. Remember, that's your deepest abdominal wall. or your deepest abdominal musculature. That wraps around horizontally. Okay, so it's literally like your body's internal weight belt or an internal corset. Now the thing is, if you've got artificial, and you're creating artificial intra-abdominal pressure, the transversus abdominis says, well, I don't have to work anymore. So then what happens is when you take off that belt and then you're at home and you're lifting something heavy, because that process has now become retarded and you're no longer optimizing the function of that pathway, then all of a sudden you're vulnerable, or you have what's called a naked spine. You're vulnerable to low back problems. So you'll see a lot of factory workers, sometimes UPS drivers, they'll actually have that back support. And then what happens is when they take it off, there's nothing there to support and stabilize their spine because that mechanism says, I don't have to work anymore. So that's a great recipe for low back issues, is when you retard that process and then eventually it doesn't work. So when you go to lift something heavy, that's when injury is going to occur. So stay away from gloves, stay away from belts, minimize mirrors, and get the right footwear, and you're going to get the best results you can in the gym.